24. You caught the individual names of the harpies that followed you through the streets of clay, between tall and vacant buildings inhabited by regretful shadows. You relished the demon wind that whined between the shards of shattered windows, and matched the unholy litany of your antique violin, with which you seduced the vixen at your heels. They followed you to the black canal, and drank in the rich decay of its stagnant oily current, the sludge that oozed like black blood in some monstrous vein. Your hags, some of which had lost their tattered wings, crept near you on their silver-sandalled feet, their gnarled hands raised gracelessly to the demon wind, an element of which they caught and swallowed in their awful mouths. You led them past the tall and vacant buildings, to the arch of displaced stone that spanned the black canal, and then you stopped midway in crossing it, so that they circled you with jerking limbs, and moaned an accompaniment to your violin's wretched tune. Stupidly, your vultures lifted legs that pirouetted in the idiot wind, and moved to the edge of the arch of displaced stone, on which they balanced for one moment before falling over and into the stagnant slime. You laughed at their swampy song, and continued to perform your heartless intonation as the demon wind rose with what was left of your clumsy harpies, their yellow masks. You watched that cluster of false faces well from you, toward the tall deserted buildings that rose like time-lost haunts of clay, and as you watched and grinned, another element of wind bubbled upward from the thick canal. It claimed you as it caught your violin and snatched it from your hands, and as you reached impotently for your tool, its strings were played upon by the demon wind, and at the squeal of that lullaby, you moved your feet with following, coaxed once again into the sky, above which arose a yellow mask of fog that spoke your miserable name. 25. I awoke to demon howling, and to the rattling of a tattered blind that flitted like some great bird's broken wing at the shattered window. I was not sad to see the pane's destruction, for I remembered witnessing an image on it that disenchanted me. I pushed myself with hands that pressed on shattered glass, and rose erect. I combed my length of hair with fingers so as to rid it of splintered glass and other sullage. The thin air of the tall and vacant building that I inhabited had suffocated my dreams, and thus I vacated the choked room and climbed cautiously down the rough stone steps that took me from the urban tower into untenanted lanes. An expanse of low and filthy cloud, resembling a rippling yellow mask, so unnerved me that I fled out of the dead city toward the stagnant canal just beyond the limits, the length of which I followed in my attempt to escape the infested metropolis and its pallid mask of cloud. I did not drop until the cityscape was a distant blur, and then I fell to knees on one cement ledge above the length of canal water. My eyes followed the serpentine flow until I saw the distant bridge that crossed over it, to a shelter of woodland. Something in the darkness of the woods beguiled my imagination, and thus evoked my daydreams, summoned me to crawl beneath the mauve sky to what remained of an antique basalt bridge, over which I crept as the water beneath me coaxed with weird whistling. I had never known water to coo in such a way, and so I paused at the other end of the bridge and listened, until I learned the whistled tune, which I tried to imitate by pressing my cracked lips together. The second sound ceased at the infiltration of my descant, and was replaced by a slithering that approached from underneath the bridge, from the hidden spot from which the structure's troll emerged. The hairless hermaphrodite, who held a thin black reed in one bleached hand. I was about to bend so as to sniff the rank aroma of the creature's double sex when, from some deep place within the woodland, there came a low metallic sound that summoned me. "Be wary of that false chime," my hobgoblin playfully counselled. But I refused to heed its coy admonition, and, rising to my slippered feet, padded along the path into the labyrinths of woodland, past thick dark trees and gigantic boulders on which moss and fungi flourished. I could see, when lifting my eyes to the tops of the trees, that the mauve sky had deepened into indigo, and I fancied that I could hear again, above those trees, the muted wailing of a banshee wind. The way sloped downward and led into a glade through which a river of blue and silver water frolicked, although it made no sound. But I could not watch that water, because I was entranced by that which stood above the wall of rock on the river's other side, and as I gawked, a peal swept toward me from the black spire that tilted over an edifice of stones. I paid no heed to the voice behind me that murmured, "Beware the false chime." I climbed the hill of grassy patches and slate that led to the rotting wooden bridge that spanned the river and its rocks, and I tripped across the splintered wood and followed a narrow path until I touched the tabernacle. The high hills behind it were lush with silent growth that rose to the darkening welkin in which dim starlight began to wink. Bending to one square of deftly placed stone, I touched my mouth to the rough surface, and shivered as its chilliness sank into me. And then I pushed away from wall and approached the entrance, where brass doors, hoary and unhinged, had fallen to the ground. I crossed the threshold and was instantly encased by an antediluvian aeration that christened my physiognomy with subtle moisture. Shadowed by my epicene mutant, I propelled through thick gloom and passed into an uninhabited chancel. The outside light had extinguished, and thus I could not see my way too clearly, and so I reached for guidance to the wormy pews that smelled of perished prayers. I approached the silhouette of an altar as a sudden effulgence of moonlight beamed through the stained glass window high before me, yet, as I studied that window, I could not comprehend its image, which might have meant to convey some unrepentant creature pent in hell. And yet, something in the form of that black figure composed of dusky glass seemed familiar, and I tried to study it until a cloud obscured the lunar light, and the window's image became a nebulous afterthought. I heard once more the moan of demonic wind from outside the edifice, and as I peered into obscure corners, I finally noticed the second threshold, narrow and obscure. Wandering to it, I discovered a circular stairway of rough-hewn stone that rose to the hidden place above. As I began to climb, I heard again, more loudly than before, the pealing of some great bell. I paused to hear another warning from the freak that followed me, but instead there came the eerie piping of a flute. Ignoring the noise, I climbed until I reached the third threshold that led me into the belfry. The choked compartment was closed by 3 walls on which were fitted arched and unstained windows of impressive size. I could smell the grey thing that leaned against one enormous bell that was savaged by a crack in its metal. The amorphous shape sniffed the air and pushed away from the bell, and as it flowed to me I fancied that it was a breathing eidolon of the image I had detected on the stained glass window above the altar. Pressing its significant nostrils to my shroud, it drank deeply of my decay, and then it spun me around and thrust me toward one arched window, upon which was reflected my remains. I moaned as black memory awakened, and the chamber echoed with the ghastly piping of some flute that was accompanied by the mocking wind outside the tower. I shuddered as my husband wrapped his rubbery arms around me, and buried his wide mouth into my hair.